Hello, hello. Good morning. How's it going, everyone? We're back. Back after a brief hiatus here. We had some crazy shit happen. Well, we had some crazy shit happen Monday. My upstairs neighbor, flooded my kitchen overnight, Sunday night. So when I woke up Monday morning, I had a totally flooded kitchen to deal with, so I couldn't stream on Monday. Couldn't stream yesterday. I was at an eye doctor. Ordered some new glasses. They're not here, but very excited. Sounds fun. Yeah, thanks, Flair. Flair the Bird, welcome to chat. Yeah, nothing like a good flooded kitchen to start your week, right? But that's all taken care of now. There ended up being not as much permanent damage as I was hopefully dealing with. Welcome to chat to you as well. Yeah, thanks. It's good to be here. I definitely missed chat. I did keep working in the interim, so we've done a lot of stuff. I've kind of settled on maybe the memory pattern that we're going to use, because we're kind of working on a little ECS that we're going to implement in our game. And I was kind of debating how I was going to back the memory. Why does everyone else's writer look so fancy? You just got to pick a good theme. You just got to go in. You got to go into appearances. You got to pick a good theme. I'm using Nightfall. I really like Nightfall. I shopped around. I pulled a bunch of ones that I kind of liked. I only really ever use dark themes, so I just pulled a ton of dark themes. They're good. The one dark theme is pretty good. The Trash Panda theme is kind of weird. I pulled a Godot theme, but I did not want to do that. But Nightfall is what I settled on. Nightfall is really good theme. I love the look. Not as much green as I would like, but strings are green, so I feel like we'll get there eventually. Like we have a little bit here, but we're not really passing a lot of strings around. But yeah, I like it. Yours looks boring. I mean, I need to make mine interesting. I'm streaming. You don't want it to be too visually interesting. I tried some themes that were like too interesting, and I was like, my eyes are bleeding. How am I gonna look at this for like 4 hours a day? You want to pick that nice medium interesting. But anyway, we had a bunch of different options for how we were gonna store our actual entity chunk data. I've settled on memory, which is like kind of the stupidest thing when you say it out loud. But what that means is I'm using the memory T, where the T is a byte, because our chunks are generic, so we can't really know what they're going to be made of at compile time. So we're just gonna declare byte chunks of the appropriate size, 16 kibibytes. Kibibits? I don't know. And we'll if we want to actually use it, so we've got the memory here in the chunk. I don't know why my brain just stopped working. If we actually need to read it in the systems, we will pull a span if you need read-write access, and we'll pull a read-only span if you only need read access. And this might seem like overkill at the moment, but the nice thing about this, if we base our access to our memory using spans, and we back it by these memories here, we could eventually change what the memories themselves are backed by. Like, right now, we're just going to declare, 16 KB chunks in managed memory. But eventually, we could change that to being like, put that in a native memory, do whatever. But this is the most straightforward thing. What I've been sorting out is how I want to handle the ownership of this memory. because since it's managed memories right now, it doesn't really matter, I don't think. But memory is iDisposable, so we want to set up a dispose pattern for it. And I'm thinking because chunk is a struct, we don't really want to do it here. We want to do it where the memory is, you know, rented or owned. So it's probably going to be up in the archetype. We'll probably do something here. So I've been changing things around here a little bit. A component is a component type. I just don't want to call it that, but it's like the component as like an abstract form. It's not like a specific component. It's a representation of the component, so it has like a unique ID and it has like a file type, or not a file type. It has like a object type. It's a type declaration. For us, it's going to be structs. Like, what kind of struct are you? So that we can cast our, because the nice thing here is we can declare this as bytes and then just cast it to whichever T we actually know that it is. So it's kind of a way around having to do generic stuff, like more involved generics, which I don't want to do. That's kind of what we're doing. Kind of continuing to work on this. But how's it going, everybody? What have you been working on, Flare? Since you're a fellow writer user here. You have no context for any of this, but that's fine. Oh, what do you use? What do you code in Writer? Is it, do you just use it for GDScript? I haven't done that yet, but I'm tempted to. We're essentially, these are the memory stuff we're using, memory T and span T. Oh, you don't have context. You mean specifically what the chunks are for? Oh, yeah. Well, they're for our entities, of course. So we're doing a kind of entity model. Here, let's see if we can diagram this out a little bit. You're working on a deck builder. Hell yeah. Progress very slow. That's fine. Have you seen what we are working on fundamentally? Because that might also help. Oops. Valheim dropped a new patch. Very excited. As I dox my Steam username. I don't care. We're working on like an FTL-like, obviously. It's in the stream title. But we're working on this kind of isometric, blocky, pixel art kind of one. So what we started with so far is this. We basically just have this concept of these ships, these three-dimensional ships, and we have a tool that is beginning to let us build them out. So it's kind of fancy. It knows about compartments. So it can tell if an area is exposed to space or not. Like if I just punch a big hole here, it changes to be the color for the outside. We can plug this back up here with a door. Double door. So we have this tool and we can just kind of keep going down. It's this big auto tiler, this big isometric auto tiler we're using. You can also rotate the tile map, which is very useful. Yeah, so this is kind of the tool set we've got going right now. The issue with it, essentially, is that all of this information is like separate from the rendering. Like there's a game state here, and because we're able to rotate it, obviously the game state is separate from the rendering state. So I was like, you know, I'm doing this. I'm separating the game state from the rendering state. I want to be able to render ships off screen. Not render. I want to be able to process ships off screen and do all the calculations and stuff like that. So I don't want these to be nodes. I don't know if you use Godot. Godot has this kind of node model. So I'm kind of changing our approach, where the only things that are nodes are going to be you do use Godot, G-dot, as some say. Yeah, so I'm changing my pattern here so that we're imagining something like, let's say we have like our input handler that's an autoloader that takes in input from either the user or from, mouse pickable nodes. We pass that to like a kind of game manager object, which is like the root of the scene tree. And then that can go through a series, that can go into C# land, where we've got state managers. These are basically the systems of the ECS. I still call them managers here. But I'll probably redraw this with systems. And, we do all our calculation, like what state are we in, what's going on, what are the ships doing, so we do all the simulation stuff here. This is a very simple diagram. And then we pass things back to like maybe a scene manager who either updates or instantiates whatever scenes we actually need to render or process UI for. And then those scenes can talk to the input handler because they're like mouse pickable and stuff. And then we're back at the top. And that's kind of how a frame is going to look like for us. So I've kind of gone into C# land for all the game data stuff, where I can just simulate in pure code without nodes and things like that, or resources. And so I needed a framework for how to do this. And the framework I've chosen is ECS because I'm familiar with it. I'm comfortable with it. I've never made my own before, which is kind of the challenge here. So yeah, our progress is slow as well because I'm doing something unnecessary that's fairly complicated. Yeah, hold on, let me write this down. No worries, I'm happy to give the spiel. I kind of give the spiel over and over again. And we have kind of an interesting thing that has occurred here, where we have our entities that are just an ID and a reference to the archetype that contains them. I might actually remove this reference eventually, but I like having it on hand. So this is like our entity. And so the archetype it belongs to is formed by, components. A component is also just an ID and a type. Its type being like, is it a position? Is it a direction? Is it a whatever? A rotation? Who cares? It could be anything. And then so these components form this archetype. But there's something interesting that happens here, where a component could actually include another entity. So its type could be an entity. Or, an entity could be part of its type here. It wouldn't just be the entity. There would be like... I guess plugging it in here is wrong. Be like... So you can nest things. It's kind of strange. We're kind of in an unusual position. So entities are pretty much equivalent to components, or entities could be components. So like this component's type is this entity, because this entity's ID is not distinct from like a component ID, and its type is its archetype. So this can just go. This could just go down. And in fact, let's do that. Let's expand this a little bit. Let's put another entity here. So a component of an entity could itself just be an entity as well, even without that separation. So we could say we got this other entity whose archetype is like these components. And then this entity itself forms part of this archetype. So we can get kind of wild with this. Entity is not equivalent to an instance. No, an entity is an instance. That's the difference between an entity and an archetype and a component. So a component is a type. I mean, it might also be, you know, this component would have a unique value as part of this entity, but it has no life independent of this entity. An entity has like an independent life. Like an entity can gain and lose components and not, you know, and continue to exist. But a component like is defined by what it's made of. So which is why this entity is this component's type. But this entity's archetype is this combination of components. And same thing, this entity's archetype includes this component and this entity. It's kind of weird. I need to think more about the distinction between this entity as component type and entity as like direct member. This equivalence is bizarre, but I think it's accurate. If anything, I think I need to get rid of this and just put the entity here straight up. I need to think about this a little more, but this is kind of the direction we're headed. This gives me pause. But so how could a component have a type of an instance? So I'll explain that. An entity could have a type of an instance because so this is just our entity. This is all it is. This is its ID and its archetype. What does it belong to? And this is its entity ID. If we have a component that's an entity instance, that like if we decide this entity is a component of something else, it will then get a component ID that's assigned to it, and its type will be entity. It will need to be stored sparsely, so you can't store entity components densely in an archetype. You would need to store it sparsely because this entity would be stored on its own archetype. So it's a little inefficient to reference entity components directly, but you'd basically say this entity is a component. This is its unique ID as a component, separate from its entity ID. It could actually be the same ID, theoretically, now that I'm thinking about it. But its type is of an entity. And you could just treat it as if it was a component. It would be stored sparsely. So I guess my diagram is wrong. This is maybe what's inaccurate, this relationship here. Maybe this is, yeah, this is inaccurate. I should have it be like this. Let's delete this. Hey, Lucas, are you making your own ECS? Yes, I don't know why. I mean, I do know why, but it's like a bad idea. It's a waste of time. This is how the diagram would look. Something like this. So an entity can be attached to another entity facilitated by a component type. I feel like I need this, but I maybe don't. I need to think about that a little more. I think I need this intermediary. But I maybe don't. Anyway, that's not the challenge for today. The challenge for today is finishing our storage system here. Oh, Ferlansky redeemed stretch. Hey, Ferlansky, how's it going? I didn't see that. Let me get the stretch going. How's everyone doing? How are you, Ferlansky? Lucas? Yeah, I guess that's the core thing that we then need to map out. An entity is an instance of an archetype. A component is the form. It's the shape of a piece that builds the entity. And by that, I mean this component struct. We have examples of components, like actual examples, like a direction struct or position struct. The component struct itself is like a component type. So I probably should rename this component type. I've done it a couple times. I don't like doing it because I don't like going component type dot type and stuff like it feels redundant. Like having a specific component or component struct to me just clearly means that it's like almost the header. It's like the representation of a specific of the generic form of like a direction struct or a position struct. Which now has no ID or anything to it. It maybe should. Direction should maybe have an ID. Because we know it's type. Maybe we just have a type lookup where you look up a type and you get its ID. So that we're not having to store an ID on every single one. You'd have like a... That wouldn't really work. It would be a... Yeah, maybe we do need to have an ID associated with it. Maybe a direction or a position. Maybe an actual component needs to reference its component ID. Needs to just have it on hand. Okay, let's do that for now. Because if you're operating on this thing, yeah, you might need to know this. Oh, maybe it's static. For built-in components, this could be a static number, couldn't it? Like I could just... A component ID has a version, which I don't totally agree with. Actually, I do agree with that. Because if components map to entities, it would need that. Say like 0, 0. So this could be, its ID could be static for a given one. So like direction could be 0, position could be 1. Like built-in components that I make can have static IDs. I think that's reasonable. It almost, in this case, just needs to have an index. It doesn't even need a version. But to maintain compatibility with more mutable or more limited lifetime components, like entity components. Verlansky works nuts right now, not enough hours in the day. Fair. I've been all right. My kitchen flooded on Monday. That was fun. I came into the kitchen in the morning to water pouring from the ceiling, from like ceiling vents and light fixtures. So that was fun. I'm gonna need to maintain a list of all of these, or I'm gonna get confused very quickly. Should I use index 0, or should index 0 be like an invalid? An invalid. I should probably reserve 0 for being an invalid component type. So we'll call direction ID 1, position ID 2. That's the only ones I've made so far, but we can keep going. Moving around the kitchen like ship it, yeah. It was not an expensive fix. Yeah, I couldn't stream on Monday. I was dealing with that. Luckily, very little was damaged. It was very messy. I had an oven guy out yesterday to look at my oven, which just got torrential like rain poured over it. But no serious damage. I've just been like drying the kitchen out for a few days. It was one of those where you're like, it looks a lot worse than it is. But yeah, geez, that was like my whole morning on Monday. So that was fun. But we're back. And then yesterday I couldn't stream. I was at the eye doctor buying some new glasses for the first time in like 4 years. I'm excited for those bad boys to come in a couple weeks here. All right, so I think our archetype is a class, which I think is reasonable because it's got a lot of bullshit on it. It's not a small enough payload or an appropriate thing to make a struct, because at the moment entities reference their archetype, and so I would rather pass references around than values. I don't know if we're eventually going to have it like this, but I like it. This simplifies a lot of lookups right now if an entity just knows its archetype. It makes cleanup a little involved because it means we'll need to... Well, an archetype never changes its composition, I guess. Entities would just move around within it. Yeah, that should be fine. Part of the reason that I want to be able to have... part of the big reason to be able to have entities be component types, like individual entities be a component type, is so that we can basically have a chunk of entities somewhere, or a chunk of components that reference this entity. God, is this an entity? And its archetype is this entity? I don't know. But I basically want a component that can say, I am this entity, so we can have a list of entities that reference this entity through the mediator of its component. So that if like an entity dies and a bunch of other entities reference it, we can go through and grab the archetypes of all entities that refer to this entity and clean up the references. So I like to do it that way because that's how that supports that structurally. I need to think more about this relationship a little bit. But in general, I think this is right. So we have a bunch of things on our archetype that we have a dictionary of archetype edges that I want to work on. An archetype edge is a graph that lets us map from our current archetype to either, like, let's say we add a component. This is the archetype that we would get if we added this component. This is the archetype we would get if we removed this component. So that way an archetype knows where to move everything if a component is added or removed. So, and this is like something that we're going to lazily initialize. We're going to lazily initialize. We should do it here. Why the F? I'm already using system.collections.generic. There we go. Sometimes Writer spazzes out and adds a bunch of verbosity to my code that I don't understand. But yeah, our streaming schedule is going to be messed up for the next week or two just because I'm in between a schedule change at work. So in a couple of weeks, we'll be streaming later for longer. We're going to double the length of our streams from 2 hours to 4 hours. We'll probably change the day of the days that we stream. We're probably going to do Tuesday to Saturday instead of Monday to Friday, which is exciting. Yeah, it got approved for trial. So I can do it for at least one pay period, and we're going to try it out. So it might not be a permanent change. I'm really hoping it becomes one. No promises. But it got approved for trial, but it's not starting for a couple weeks. So I'm kind of like in this weird transitional period where like my meetings are moving around, but I'm still working at my old schedule. So we're going to miss some streaming days for the next week or two. Like I can't stream tomorrow because I have a meeting that's just right in the middle of when I would normally be streaming right now. But yeah, starting in like mid-November, we should have a new, very consistent schedule. I think it's going to be Tuesday to Saturday instead of Monday to Friday as well, which will be interesting. It'll be cool to do Saturday streams. I might try one out soon. But yeah, excited to do longer, better streams. Okay, so here's the stuff that we have so far. So I just mentioned our dictionary, our lazy. So for any given archetype, we know which should this be plural? It is 2 edges. It's not just like one edge. I might come up with a different term for this. But we know what that does. At the moment, we have a list of chunks, which I hate. We're not doing this. We're going to add some kind of intermediate, like a collection or something. Like a list of collection of chunk collections. It won't fundamentally change this, but it's okay. We also have a dictionary, which is like you plug in a component, you get the index of that component in this list. I should probably change the component. I should probably change this to have component type, and then have like another one that says like component chunks, and then have the actual chunk within that. You did a couple streams yourself? Hell yeah. What? How am I not following you? This is insane. Started recreating Mindsweeper so you can bot that, so you can make a bot that will complete it. Twitch is like covering my chat. I can't fucking see. All right, there we go. So you can write a bot that will complete it, then backpedal that into a hint system to make a modern Mindsweeper. Oh, cool. That's very cool. All right, so we also have an array of components. Yeah, I do need to change the name of this. Because it's confusing. The array of components is its composition, which we need for some things. We need this to be able to double check if an archetype has a component. We also are going to keep a single chunk list of entities. This we can keep the way it is. And we'll have the entity index. So you can get a specific entity. So that's the archetype. The world is where we're going to put everything. It's pretty bare bones right now. It just has a list of archetypes and some lookups that are maybe helpful. Like you can get the set of components that are included in an archetype. Probably don't need to also have... Well, I want to have this here because it's kind of like a signature. This array of components. I might come up with a way to do this. I can't just hash the array of components. But we could figure something out using the component IDs to create some kind of unique signature. I mean, this kind of is a signature itself. It's just kind of in a weird format. We have a dictionary for plugging in a component, which will give you the set of archetypes that include that component. It should probably also give you the index of those components. So you can say, just give me all of the archetypes and their... Although, I don't know. Once you have the archetype, you can then just ask the archetype where its component is. Which is probably a better way to do it. Because you're going to need to reference the archetype anyway. Because you're going to need to pull its chunks out. Or, you know, be able to reference... Oh yeah, we do need something here. We do need a reference that holds our list of chunks here, don't we? A collection. And it needs to be a class so that we can pass it by reference. The only thing we're passing by value is going to be the chunks themselves. And that's going to be the most intensive part of this, so which is why we're relying on memory and spans here. Cheers for the follow. You're just live when it's convenient. Yeah, no worries. I want to get the notification. I want to be sure to get the notification. Just making the Mindsweeper for the sake of practice more than anything else. That's really cool. Oh, my coffee is dying. Rip. It's going cold on me. All right, so what do we want to dig into? Should we try to make this more understandable? I don't want to change this to be called component type. I guess the only person that really needs to be able to understand this code is me. I want to make it understandable to people like watching it and reading. Hey pandas. Yeah, no worries. It sucked, but it's not a permanent issue. Just kind of an inconvenience. Did kind of kill my momentum on YouTube. I was doing really well. I've been doing really well the last couple of weeks. But that's fine. You gotta keep churning out those videos or the algorithm does not look kindly on you anymore. All right, so the task that we need to really dig into, I started writing out like commands to like add and remove components. We do need to do that stuff, but what I need to do first is finish coming up with the life cycle management for the chunks. Because we do need to be able to dispose the memory. And it talks a lot about the life cycles here. Basically, when you create a memory, you are calling a memory pool. You're calling this memory pool, and you are getting back. So you call memory pool shared, and then from that you rent the memory pool. We might eventually make our own memory pool, but at the moment we'll just use the generic one. And then you rent a memory. You rent some memory. So you rent at least minimum buffer size. For us, the minimum buffer size is going to be the size of a kilobyte, which is approximately the size of an L1 cache, which is like the standard chunk size. And what you get back is this iMemory owner. And this iMemory owner, whoever has the reference to the iMemory owner is basically the one left holding the bag. And they're the one that's going to be responsible for disposing of the memory. This should probably belong to the Archetype. But it could belong to the world. But it should probably belong to the Archetype, because the Archetype is the one that actually has its list of, because you get another iMemory owner back every time you rent memory, which is a little inconvenient. It would be nice if I could just, if I implemented my own memory pool, I feel like I could just dispose of the whole memory pool at once. I need to do some more research on that, if that's true. If that's true, that could simplify our problem, and we don't need to do as much of this. Give me the memory pool. This is all it's got. Yeah, the memory pool itself is iDisposable. Kind of want to look at what happens when it disposes itself. What's getting discussed? Hey, Arya, we're talking about the memory backing of my ECS system. We're going to be using memory and span, which is pretty good. It provides you arbitrary windows into memory. It's pretty good. It's a pretty easy way to implement generic data storage. Are you going to manually manage the memory? Well, at the moment we are only using managed memory, so I don't really, but I do need to dispose of it. And it's good to set up the disposal so that if we do eventually switch to native memory, we can still, like, we'll be able to do it safely. I don't know when or why we would do that, but it's possible. Because memory can point, the memory T object can point to arbitrary memory. So it's just good to dispose of it. Are you doing manual memory management inside C#? Not exactly. I feel like because I'm just keep using the word memory, it gets confusing. But memory is like a thing. Memory T is a thing, and it's a buffer that can wrap references to either managed or unmanaged memory. At the moment, we're just wrapping managed memory, so it's not like I have to do all of the management myself. But there is potential to change that in the future. If we want to, like, you know, eliminate the need for if we run into issues with the garbage collector and stuff like that. So yeah, so does the memory pool, if you dispose the memory pool, freeze all resources used by the memory pool. I need to look a little bit more into this. I think at the moment we're just going to use the static memory pool and manage the individual iMemory owners in the archetypes. I'll just have that be part of its process here. So to do that, we add a private disposed field. Say if we're not disposed yet, then we'll go through, and this is where we will dispose of our iMemory owners. C dot press finalize. I think this is the right pattern. And then so also just say, we could also make this a separate, could also make a separate void that's disposed true. Make sure we're doing this right. Memory and read and span have a lot of rules, or I should say usage guidelines. And I read through these, just looking for the part that I was interested in. Here we go. If you have an iMemory owner reference, you must at some point dispose of it or transfer its ownership, but not both. So it's not strictly required for us to call dispose, since we're only using managed memory, but I feel like it's a good pattern. That's what I keep telling myself. Yeah, so whoever calls the renter should own it, and that's going to be the archetype. Kajiro, hey, I found some of your Godot videos on YouTube. You think my project looks so cool. Dropped a follow a few days ago. Happy to catch me on stream. Thanks. Thank you so much, Kajiro. Thanks for hopping over to the Twitch side. I am very touched by the people that are just kind of watching through the live streams on YouTube. Honestly, when I set up the multi-streaming, I was just expecting to use YouTube as an archive, as like a free video archive. It's not expecting people to watch it over there. Oh, hey, Scott. Speaking of someone watching over on the YouTube, what's on the plate for today? We are working on the memory that is backing the stuff that we're doing. So here's like our chunk for our component chunks. We've settled on using memory T and span T. So our memory, so this memory thing is going to be just at the moment just a 16 kilobyte chunk of managed memory as bytes, so that we can implement chunks generically. And then I'll change this to data. It's not really a list of items at the moment. It's kind of just data. I like data. And yeah, we can basically cast it to span or read-only span as the T that we need. So we can basically, in whatever system, the system is like, let me grab this chunk of this component. Let me cast it to this component's type. I don't know if we need chunk index on the chunk. I don't know why I put this here. We're never going to have a chunk and be like, I need to find this chunk on the archetype or on the list of collections. I feel like that's incorrect. I think we need that. I'm going to leave it for now in case we do need it. Kaijiro, you'll use the YouTube videos to see every episodes you missed, I guess. I appreciate that. There's a bunch of people that I think just watch through the videos in the background, and I love that. That's kind of one of the vibe. That's kind of the vibe I'm trying to go for here. Is just like chill co-working stream. So I love that people feel like it's chill enough that they can just have this in the background and just hang with us, even if they're doing it asynchronously. Hey, Broheart. Memory management a little bit. Not serious memory management, though. Just a little. In a memory managed language, yes, brain hurt. Look, we're just protecting ourselves. We're just protecting ourselves for the future. We don't technically need to do this now. We could just punt on this now. Disposable. I can spell. I don't really need a separate dispose. I think we can just have it here. So we need to keep track of our iMemories is the thing. It's the thing we need to do, though, here. We really just need a list of iMemory owners, I think. Unless we need to be able to recover a specific chunk. Let's make our data... We still need a data type here that fills this list chunk. We need this list chunk to be its own data type. At the moment, I think I'm just going to call it a collection. And that's already a thing. I guess component is also already a thing. I need to get more verbose with my variable types here. Collection is going to be a class, right? Yeah. I could call it a chunk list. Just to be less confusing about it. What was it forgetting? Who we were, where we are, what year it is. It's bad, Doc. Lock FPS to 88 and run build in release mode. I guess you don't need to be going 88 miles an hour if you're just trying to move the chair through a wormhole. Probably running at like 24 FPS, maybe. Scott, yep, that's exactly what you enjoy about the stream. Fascinated about the game and the game dev in general. You were a big fan of FTL and doing your own dev work in the background. That's really great. I really appreciate that. Definitely feel free to, I think you might be in the Discord, but yeah, please feel free to like share what you're working on. I love that. I love when people do that. Link is in my About Me on Twitch and in the channel page on YouTube to the Discord. All right, so we're gonna have a list of chunks. Guess it's gonna be public. Chunks. Do I need to know what component type it is? Probably. That would probably be good. Probably want a dictionary. How are we going to look this up, though? Like, if we want to get a specific chunk index, maybe we don't need to do that. I'm going to call this component chunks. You've redone all the art again for Spud Customs, but now the primary antagonist is too sexy. Oh no. That's fine. I feel like people tend to make the antagonists like very sexy in games, because it's supposed to be like, they're supposed to be like seductive, like everything they represent is supposed to be seductive, like the power they wield, stuff like that. It's really easy to make that physical, to make that physically manifest. Okay, you're of the opinion that you can forgive any evil if they're doing it sexily. Maybe. I mean, that's part of why they get away with that stuff, right? What if a component kept track of all of the chunks that it had? That'd be kind of cool. If it just kept track of I'm gonna have to think about that. That's not the traditional way ECS works. Traditionally, ECS would be like each archetype has lists of contiguous arrays in memory. I guess you want to do it that way. So I guess an entity needs more information. An entity needs to know. We're getting pretty deep here. An entity needs to know how far. Honestly, we don't really even need to implement chunks right now. We could get away without chunks. We could just have one. Well, no, that wouldn't work with memory, with the memory T that we're using. So yeah, an entity needs to know what archetype it's in, and it needs to know what chunk it's in, and what chunk index it's in. What's the index of the chunk is. Oof. Big oof. Okay. Okay, let's focus on that. Let's focus on that. You think the Discord needs to decide whether or not the antagonist is too sexy? Well, at risk of violating the TOS, let's see here. Let's see how sexy this protagonist is. Supervisor Russet. Oh man, he looks like Mr. Potato. My childhood. Mr. Potato Head. We're gonna hold this. We're gonna keep this up here long enough for this to become the thumbnail on YouTube. Just to confuse people. His little thumbnail, the fact that there's such a distinction between their little like icons and like the full rendering. How are you making these, Broheart? Mustache is magnificent. The pixel art's pretty great. That's what you want going on for Movember. Nice. Yeah, get the super waxed like handlebar mustache. What's disturbing me more than like the look of the supervisor is like how dissonant the iconography, the icon is for him, and this. That's maybe what's the most disturbing is here he's got this like cutesy little face and he doesn't look like he could do anything bad. And then you look at him here and you're like, oh, this guy's like killed people. And he's ordered people to kill people. And he stands on his desk, which is always a boss move. I love how they have chairs back there, but like they don't use them because they have like human proportioned furniture. The universe building. It's so good. You always stand on the desk? Oh yeah. That's how you assert dominance over the people you're supervising, by standing on the desk. Icon Russet is just cute and cuddly. Full-size Russet looks like a dictator. Yeah, that's wild. Except the Quartermaster Potato. Oh man, I can only imagine. He's too large to stand on the desks. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. All right, so yeah, so if you plug an entity in here, well, you can get the entity index here. I guess how far down do how because if you plug in your entity, you get the chunk. I guess I should call this entity chunk. Maybe just chunk index. So you plug in an entity into the entity chunk or into the chunk index. You plug an entity in. Maybe I specify this. Maybe you plug an entity in. Instead of just plugging an ID in. That way you know specifically what you're plugging in. Yeah, because that's how we do it up here with the component. This should be called a collection index, I guess. I don't know. I'm not happy with the names, the names that I've chosen for these things. I think it's confusing. But that's fine. We can figure that out. Oh, so we need the iMemories. We need like public list. This can be private, huh? Memory owners. All right, memory managed. So we just need to, I need to import something. There we go. So we just need to dispose of the memory owners when we eventually dispose of Archetype. Not sure about the GC suppress finalize. I was told I need this. I'm gonna go read up, double read up on the dispose pattern for C#. I haven't had to do it in some time. Thank you. Unlike playtest 35 of the narrative. Hell yeah. Mischief managed. Whole game source disappears. We don't need to initialize the field, but we do need to say new list. You just say new. All of these can be lazily initialized. Not this. Composition we should get from, well, not this either. So we should get our composition. If we make a new archetype, you're not going to make an archetype until you need to put at least one entity in it. I'm not sure how I want to do that. Can make like an array of entities. Pass in an array of entities. I don't mind if creating archetypes is going to be not happen that often. It'll happen. Actually, it might happen fairly often. We might need to change the way we do this. Components. We might need to make the archetype and then initialize some things about it. But we can pass the component signature for sure. We need to generate an ID, so you need to pass the ID in. Pass the composition and the ID in. That we will know. And then we can have a separate function to actually do other things there. Collection chunks is going to be a new. Can't I do this? Oh, does it expect something? What does collection expect? Oh, it expects to know its component. Entity. Oh, a collection expects a component. It doesn't need to be a collection. This can just be a list of chunks. We could make a distinction if we want. Right now, a collection is just going to be for entities. So your collection has a list of chunks. It needs a lookup. So I think we do need a dictionary here. Public dictionary. No, we don't. We don't need that. Because on an archetype, where did I close? That's right here. On an archetype, if you know your chunk index from your entity, you know where all of the components are. Is that right? How do they do this normally? Because normally, this is where I'm like an array of structs would be easier than a structure of arrays. Because with the structure of arrays, a entity could take, or a component could take up more space in a chunk than another component. Like components are not going to exactly all be the same size. So the problem... Oh, hey Doodley's Catch, redeem the hydrate. Let me take care of that right now. Yeah, I hope all is well. Thank you. We're doing okay. I won't regale you with the story of how my kitchen flooded this Monday through no fault of my own. Which I'm not saying sarcastically, it was truly through no fault of my own. So yeah, so that's the interesting part, is the traditional ECS implementation. Let me go get Sander. Sander, explain to me how this is supposed to work here. So like, here's normally how an chunk system works. You have like, you're trying to deal with this issue, which is like, not every entity has the same set of components. It's called the ABC problem. And the fact that if you have more than two components, you can't solve this sorting problem. This is like anyone who's ever tried to filter anything knows about this. But an archetype is supposed to solve this, because an archetype basically has the components at the same indexes in each chunk. So does that mean I have to limit my chunk usage to whatever the single largest component is in the archetype, so that I can have them all at the same index? I think that's what that means, right? To make sure that that we don't run out of space for one of the... Ooh, that kind of sucks. That's fine. Components should be small. They should be small beans. Sorry to hear it. No, yeah, no worries about the caps. Caps is appropriate there. But we're doing good. I cleaned it up. It's not a problem. It was just a rough way to start the week. It's why we didn't stream on Monday. I was trying to stream Monday, Wednesday, Friday this week. My schedule's kind of messed up because I'm transitioning to a new work schedule, which will hopefully let us stream longer for later. But I'm in this awkward transition phase this week and next week. So yeah, this is weird. The implication is that I need to know the largest struct in the archetype and only use that. We're gonna have a lot of wasted memory if I can't make all the components approximately the same size. How do you get around that? How do people normally get around that? I'm gonna need to do some research. Hey, Cubus. The alternative is to literally have a dictionary lookup every time if you want to specifically go by entity, but that's insane. We're not doing that. That's insane. You can't do that. That defeats the whole purpose of like loading up 3 arrays of components and then just indexing into all 3 of them at the same point to know what is the deal with your entity. Otherwise, we need to load up the entity every time. The entity then would need to know its indexes into all of its other components and then use that lookup. And then you can't, so then you would need to be iterating over, oh, and then chunk, oh God, that would be horrible. Then you'd go, I don't know how you do that unless you just limit it to whatever the size of the largest component is. Hey Cubus, I'm thinking about structures of arrays. And so like, let's say we have 3 components in our structure. None of these diagrams help. And you know, our chunks are all the same size. Our chunks are 16 kilobytes. So like, here, let's diagram it out. So we have like chunk A, or chunk. Oh, let's just say chunk. Chunk. I want to get better at doing this quickly. So chunk. Collection. Or let's say archetype. So our archetype has these different lists of chunks. The chunk would have, so we've got these lists of chunks. So chunk. And these components are different sizes, right? So like, oh God, I hate this. So we'll use different amounts of the chunk. And I don't see a way of doing this in such a way so that it's consistent. Unless I just limit myself to whatever the single largest component type is. Just so we can index into each chunk the same, so that we're in the same chunk and within the same index for each entity. You're working on the kilobyte level now? Kivus, I feel like you should be workflow guruing on this ECS. You should, Kivus. Kivus, we're working on the kilobyte level now because I need to implement generic chunks. The chunks need to be generic because we obviously don't know what components we're going to be putting putting into our chunks at compile time. So my answer to that is to use memory T and to basically just declare to rent a memory of type byte at the same size. So we just do 16 kilobytes, the typical amount you would do for a chunk. And this way, we have our chunks that have generic byte memory that we then just cast to a type-specific span based on what component is stored in there. So we'd look at our component type and then cast to that type. Cast a span of that type. And that's how we get from generic memory to specific. But the way to do that for me, in my mind, is to declare the memory in advance of equal size. And then obviously you can only fit as many components as will fit of that struct type, as that struct size. But if the components have different sizes, then each chunk can be filled to different degrees. And then it seems like our chunk efficiency is just whatever the single largest component type is in an archetype. I feel like that's it. I feel like that's just the way that works, right? Am I crazy? Why do you need to index into a collection at the same time? Oh, this is maybe a bad... So a collection, what I'm calling a collection, is just the list of chunks. Because an archetype will have more than one chunk. Hey Tejo, you don't have a clue who I am, but YouTube threw me here. YouTube is doing that. May I ask what you were optimizing for here? Nothing. This is just the framework we're using to back our components. We're not optimizing for anything. I feel like the reality is that our chunk efficiency is based on the largest component in an archetype. So Tejo, if you're still here, we're working on an FTL-like. This is kind of a mock-up I have of a bridge using our art style. We're doing kind of a side-on pseudo-isometric starship simulator. At the moment, we just have a system for building the ships that is very rudimentary because we're solving a lot of problems with isometric stacking. So it's kind of like FTL, but you can stack decks. So like a ship will have multiple decks to it. And so I have a little ship builder tool here we wrote in GD script that lets me just build. At the moment, it just lets me build flying housing projects like they're just cement blocks. But we also have a compartmentalization system that can tell if a compartment is sealed or not, so you can do FTL atmospheric stuff. But basically, you can make doors. We've got an auto tiling system that's pretty fancy. We can rotate around our tile map. So we are trying to address these visibility issues. So we've got a way to build and view into an isometric 3D world that we're going to be using to build ships, and you're going to be, you know, managing your starship systems and all that stuff. We're working on the C# layer of it, which is where all the game simulation is happening, which is why we're working on an ECS. It's not very aesthetically pleasing yet, but we're working on it. It's like a Star Trek-ish FTL. Yeah, pretty much. The component is a bunch of tiles working together as one, like double door. A block is a component. You've also never really made an ECS? Me either. I haven't done that either. Will the ships be pre-built or player-made? Well, that's the funny thing. At the moment, this tool is really just for me, to help me build the ships. But if it ends up being a good tool, I want at least modders to be able to have access to it. I don't know if a player will be able to be allowed to edit their ship mid playthrough, but I don't see why not. We'd have to do a lot to the tool to make it usable by other people in a way that's not broken. But that's kind of my approach to the development of this game, is going to be making tools for myself that are fairly useful and accessible. So I'm going to have a ship editor, I'll have a scenario editor, maybe I'll have campaign editor or something like that, and just make these tools for myself that help me build the game. And if the tools are good, they should be good. If they're good enough for me, I mean, I obviously would need to polish them up for even modders to be able to use them. But the end goal would be to make it so that content generation in this game is fairly easy. So people can come up with their own adventures, their own ships, their own planets, and you know, things to do, so that I don't have to come up with all the content. Yeah, Cubus. There isn't a problem we're addressing per se. I like the ECS framework. I like how this works as a thing, beyond just its performance benefits. I like thinking in ECS because I've used ECS for years. I just haven't had to make one myself before. So it's a little bit of a different challenge. Oh yeah, Arch. I've looked at Arch. We're getting most of our ideas from this person, Sonder Mertens, is helping me mostly with the architecture. This is the creator of Flex, which is a really great entity component system for C and C++. I've definitely been poring over existing solutions like Arch. Arch and other good systems, they use a bunch of nonsense that we're not using, like templating and generics and all this stuff. I'm trying to avoid some of that stuff. I think a archetype just needs to know what its biggest component is. which is unfortunate. And I think we're just going to waste memory, which is okay. The amount of memory we're talking about here is not significant. Tejo, good approach. Games with the robust editors tend to be able to keep themselves up if they have a fan base. That's what I'm thinking. We're thinking long tail. We're thinking about long term. Mup, you're watching a 56 minutes ago part. You think you should reserve max int as a valid IP? As in valid IP. You think I should reserve, you should have the reserved max int as an invalid IP. Yeah, you're probably right. If we've reached max int, we have a problem. We shouldn't do that because our ID system also uses version. So we have index and version. So we will reuse indexes. You're not going to see this for an hour. So we have max int for index, and we also have version. But yeah, that's a good catch. When we come up with our ID generator, we'll prevent it from going that high. I'm also tempted to reserve 0 as an invalid ID. I think you were talking about this for my components. I think it was when I was working on the actual components. Oh yeah, because we're using static IDs for built-in components. Because there's no reason to not do that. So direction always has a component ID of 1. It doesn't have its entity ID, which I think is fine. If you grab one of these, you'll know where its entity is because it'll be at the same index in the chunk. Okay, well, we need to be careful that we don't make huge components, but I think that's fine. So we can have all of our components be fairly small and accessible because we're going to have nested entity, the concept of nested entity structures. So an entity will be made up of components, but an entity can also be made up of other entities facilitated through a component. So if an entity becomes a component of another entity, a new type gets created. A new component type gets created where the type points to this entity. And this kind of entity is stored sparsely because this component can't be stored directly within this entity's archetype. In fact, we can even make this explicit because this entity is itself stored in another archetype, so it's stored sparsely. So it's going to be more expensive to refer to entity components or components that are entities. I'm making some space here. So we can say this dense. We can say dense here. We can say sparse here. But how are you doing, Cubus? I haven't talked to you in a while. Cubus is still the guru. Cubus will always be our workflow guru, especially if we're building something that Cubus has never built before, because he's going to be the one that keeps me honest. Because when I tell people that I'm making an ECS, the thing that they should tell me back is why. Because I shouldn't be doing this. This is not a good use of time. But it's kind of like everything else I'm doing. I'm investing a lot of time up front to come up with a system that will work for me in the long run. And I say work for me in the long run because if everything in the game is built out of entities and components and stuff and run by systems, to me that reduces the cognitive load of thinking about the systems and components and entities. Otherwise, if you just do it with like a standard like object-oriented model, you end up with what a colleague of mine calls a web of references, where you have classes that reference other classes that interoperate. So we have this sparse collection and this dense collection. So a component that is backed by an entity goes into the sparse collection. Same thing with like a component that's too big. but a regular component will go into the dense collection. Something like this is what we're imagining. There's actually more going on here than I'm thinking about. A component doesn't just have an ID and a type, it has a payload. Maybe the entity is the payload. No, the entity needs to be part of the type. There is also a payload here. There's more going on here than I'm giving it credit for, because this is basically mapping an entity relationship, and this component needs to have some say about what that relationship is. And that's probably another component, honestly. Or it's this component and then somehow... I need to think more about this. I need to think more about this structure. This needs more thinking. I'll think about this later. It's not the thing we need to work on right now. It's an interesting problem. It's usually called an entity relationship. Difficult to create a solution for a problem that doesn't exist yet. You've certainly fallen for that a few times. It's not a problem that doesn't exist yet. It's an organizing principle. We're using ECS as a framework, as an organizing principle, because all of our gameplay stuff doesn't exist in the scene tree. It's not backed by nodes. It has no independent structure. So it can kind of be anything. And given the ability to choose anything, I kind of choose ECS. It's just I haven't had to make one, so we're dealing with a lot of the boilerplate. ECS admittedly comes with a lot of boilerplate. Do you stand for your solutions? I will stand. I see you're punishing me with the sit down, stand up. I see that. All right, I'll see you guys on the other side. Be right back. All right, there we go. Nubs a lot. Welcome to the YouTube chat. What is a vector 3i? A vector 3i is an integral vector, and it's a struct. It's a Godot struct. I like it because we're using a grid-based game. I like having vector 3i's. I have my desk lamp on another table that doesn't move when I raise my standing desk, so when I do that, it just blinds me. Always looks like you're sinking down. Yeah, I'm melting. I'm melting under the weight of all of these tasks that I take on that have no direct relation to making the game. There's an extent to which I'm just making tools to make tools. But you mostly play around in Unity and hadn't heard of that before? Yeah, no worries. No worries. Welcome in. We're using Godot, but I understand. I was in Unity I worked in Unity for like over a decade. I worked like, you know, using the Unity engine. I don't want to confuse anybody. Which is part of the reason why I like ECS so much. My last 4 years of using Unity was using their data-oriented tech stack, which included an ECS, which I really liked. I should honestly look at the source code for how they did it. I've been looking at other systems. Their system is complicated AF, but I should look at some of the organizing principles. So here's a chunk. So we have an entity count. We have a chunk index. I don't think a chunk needs to know where it's at in the collection index. Especially because it's a struct. I'm going to take that out. And then so we have this collection, which I'm going to change the name of this. This name sucks. But it has a list of chunks. It has the component of it. And it's going to have... This is the thing that's responsible for making the chunks. So it needs some information. It needs to know... Chunk actually maybe doesn't even need to know what component it is. A collection definitely needs to know what component it is. It also needs to know what size it is. Maybe we call that like max count or something like that. Max chunk count is just going to be based on whatever the largest component in the collection is. So the collection doesn't even need to know what that component is. It just needs to know how many things can be in the chunk. Can instantiate that list. So component as well as max chunk count. Oh no, it's not the max chunk count, it's the max item count. Maybe we call it per chunk max. Maybe that's what we call it, per chunk max. It's just the maximum number of things in a chunk. Does make sense to create things from zero sometimes. Helps to understand the tools you're using. Yeah, exactly. Like, I could have just... Honestly, I could just be using Arch. And we're not talking about Arch Linux. We're talking about Arch ECS. This is a great ECS library. It's written in C#. Super fast. Super dope. Could totally use this. It's maintained. Had an update 2 months ago. But I'm trying to limit if I'm doing all this work in C# and I'm making the other thing is like an ECS, when you build an ECS for a game engine, that's very different than using an ECS for a specific game. So there are decisions that we're going to make when constructing this ECS that don't make sense normally, I think. But I think for our game, it is going to be good. It's going to be good. I think we're eventually going to have a good time. It's going to be a little rough getting our footing. But I think, you know, a couple more weeks, we'll have a bare bones ECS mechanism. Everything we're figuring out now is implementation details. Excuse me, I'm feeling a little sniffly all of a sudden here. So the collection will know what its per chunk maximum is. And we'll have some functions here of like add component. And if you try to add a component to this collection and the chunk is, or if you add a, Oh yeah, chunk will know its count. Calling it entity count, I might as well call it item count. Or I don't know. It is entities. It's not storing entities per se, it's storing components, but it is the entity count. I'm gonna call it item count. That way it's kind of it's not specifically anything. I mean, here it's called a component. We could change this from component to like type. That way we can store entities in chunks. Because right now a chunk takes a component, but we want to store an entity in a chunk. So yeah, we need to change this. So this needs to be a type. And its type would be, so it's item type. It may or may not need to know what its type is, but at the moment it's going to. So if we want to add something to the chunk, who facilitates that for us? It's probably the collection, right? Oh, no. So we can just... Maybe we should have this be max items. And then in the span, if you get the span back, you set the iterator to be... Because setting is easy. Setting, you just have the span and you add... And if you add, you're also just writing into the span. You're just writing into the span above the actual item count. The maximum count isn't per chunk. Maybe when we get the collection, we just cache the per chunk max. And we just use that as a way to make sure that we don't go over. So a collection also needs to not be this component thing. It needs to be... Oh no, because a component has a list of chunks. The entity needs to do that too. So chunk can't be component specific, and neither can collection. The Falcon. Can you see the game so far? Hey, welcome in. Yes, there's not much. We're going for kind of an isometric FTL-like. And at the moment, we've just been done tooling for it. So we have, we basically have an auto tiler that I wrote that handles this kind of pseudo isometric perspective. And so we can make these 3D ship constructs. Oh, hey, the Falcam, you're in the Twitch chat now. Thanks for coming over. Either way is fine. I don't prefer one or the other. Whatever works for you. So we can make these 3D things. So let's go down. Let's find the edge here. Let's make this bigger thing. And then let's go up, turn it around here, add the floors. So we've got this auto tiling tool is basic, and shipbuilding tool. So we've got the ability to make our like FTL-like ships. They're not very pretty. I need to add a lot more aesthetic variety to them. We can make them and they're in 3D. Well, 3D, they're isometric. Oh, we need to do that. Make a little airlock here. It's very aesthetically displeasing, but we're doing a lot of stuff under the hood now. You can also rotate them, which is pretty fancy. Not something you can usually do with isometric 2D. And we can just keep going. So eventually we're going to start building these ships out. Red. Where's the other side? Here it is. You got to seal them up so that you get these nice compartments, because the game can tell if what you're building is unsealed, and you get this darker gray color. So that we can do FTL things like decompressing compartments and stuff like that. So right now we just really have a set of tools. It's not ideal, but it's kind of where we're at. Still early days. But we're building out our gameplay systems, which are being written in C# using an ECS, so that we can simulate all these different ships, even when they're not being rendered on screen. By the way, what sort of entities and components are you planning to have? Welcome to the cool side of the stream. No, they're equal. I love them both. I love my YouTube audience and my Twitch audience equally. I don't choose. Twitch is definitely more talkative. I'll give it that. The strongest. Did you make it yourself, the 3D tile, or using a plugin or something? Actually, I'll show you how we're doing that. It's actually split up. So we actually only have the individual components. And it's being assembled by an auto tiler because of this outlining system thing here. This is probably not the easiest one to see. Because of the variety of outlines that we have, which gets really complicated, at first I had it working so that it was like, here's some new shapes I want to add in soon, some slopes, so we can have some more interesting shapes. But it started out being just this thing. This was like the component we used. We just had a solid block. But that became, it's a nice system for isometric games. Thank you. There's a lot of visibility issues we're trying to address with this, which are not easy. And I think we've got a good solution for it. But yeah, originally it was just the solid blocks, like the whole square cubic block was the unit we used. But the problem was the combinatoric explosion. Like, just take this one block here. With our outlining system, this is the set of all this is the set of all possible outlines for the wall and the floor blocks. This is it. If we used bit flags to represent it, it would take up an entire byte. And more importantly, drawing it would be insane. So each of these has a different set of outlines, a unique and different set of outlines. It's kind of wild. And this is just one block color, so this is just like the solid gray block color. We also needed to support at least this many blocks, and each of those would have needed one of the other. Each of these would have needed one of these. So instead, what we're doing is we've split it out into threes. And so we have the floor or ceiling, however you want to think of it. It's a ceiling when it's part of a wall, or it's the top, it's the roof if it's part of the wall, and it's like the floor, the top of the floor if it's part of the floor. And so we build things by combining individual faces together. Like here, it's these possible face splits. And we actually, our auto tiler can handle an arbitrary number of layers. So a whole stack consists of like 6 decks. And then each deck is like, right now it's 6 tile map layers, which are new as of Godot 4.3. So we have a floor layer, which is like just these components, as well as their mirrors. Then we have like the floor X, the floor Y. These things, which are, you know, so the Y facing floors, the Y facing, or the Z facing walls. So yeah, each cube now has 3 tile map layers dedicated to it. The only thing we're still rendering as a single block is like a door, because a door is like a scene collection at the moment. It's like just a solid door. So we don't need to treat them the same way because of the constraints placed on them. But everything else are these like complicated assemblies. And it's just, and all of that just so that when, oops, this is the wrong scene. We do all of that just so that when I drag out this floor, we get nice auto tiling with a clean outlining, because the outlining needs to go away if it's a contiguous surface or if it's a homogeneous surface. So you can see the dark gray in here, which we take advantage of with our cutaway tool system. You can see the dark gray, which represents that there's a wall there or some other solid object. We'll eventually get textures in here, more interesting things than just 3 colors of gray, but that was the easiest way to do it to start. And then similarly, we have a we have this compartmentalization system that can tell, and it changes the color, and that affects the auto tiler too, because we render exterior hull plating differently than interior. So right now it's treating this all as exterior hull plating because it's exposed to the outside. It's not sealed, but if we seal this back up, the auto tiler will treat it differently. Like if we put a double door here, wonk, now it's inside. So yeah, it's a really weird perspective we're using, and it presents a lot of novel challenges, but I think we're doing okay with it so far. I appreciate it. I appreciate you hopping in, checking it out, asking some questions. Could use some hue shifting to make the grays more appealing. Oh, I know, Cubus. My palette is trash. I did hue shifting for the actual colors. You can kind of see here on the left. Like for the actual color ramps, I did hue shifting, and I did not do hue shifting for the grays at all, which was a mistake. I think we'll end up doing that a little bit. I need to decide whether to put some serious time and effort into my color ramps, or if I should just go get an existing palette and just live with that. Because I don't really know color theory, and making your own palette's really hard. It is weird, but unique and good. I appreciate that. I appreciate that qualification. Hey, Mup, you're making an ECS at the moment, too. Archetype is too complicated for you. You just go with the hash map and inheritance. Okay, no, yeah. A class-based ECS is totally fine. I'm not doing that just because it leaves a lot of performance on the table. But obviously, it's super involved to like go grab that performance. You always use an existing one and expand it if necessary. Yeah, we'll see. I've already been using this color palette for a year, and it's okay. Like, this is made using this palette. This isn't terrible. It looks better when it's like used in conjunction. Like, I think the grays look really shit because they're just used by themselves in a monochromatic scene at the moment. Oh, that's funny. I only got halfway through your comment, and you said the exact same thing that I then just said. You were like, performance is not on the table, but the ease of use. The easy to use of ECS is the one I need. Yeah, that's what I like about ECS. I like ECS as a design paradigm. I love the concept of an entity has components, and then all of the logic is handled in systems. I love that stuff. But there's so many ways to do that. You could also just use an entity component thing without the system. That's what a lot of people recommend. Like Bob Nystrom has that component pattern. You can just use the component pattern without having to like dive fully into ECS. You can still get most of the advantages of the organizational principles of an ECS without having to do the whole thing. It gets confusing when you talk about it. But I think it's cool. All right, I need to think about a couple of these things off stream. I need to think about my chunk collections, and I really need to think about, I've thought about this a lot, and I thought I had it fully mapped in my head, but I need to think about this relationship between entities as components. When an instance of an entity becomes a type of component, something happens here, and I need a little bit more information here with the component part. Maybe we have a component that's just called like relationship. And so this part would actually be an entity, and it would be an entity that has as its two components, a component that defines the relationship as well as an entity that the relationship targets. There's smarter ways to do this using very complicated entity relationship graph stuff, which we might eventually get to, but I need to think about a more short-term solution. I need to think more about the sparse and dense storage as well. Cubus, you also don't have to use a single color ramp for one thing. Like the light in this room, let me see. The light in this room looks more pinkish from the floor. So you could also use pink light for the sides and blue for the shadow sides. That's a good point. That's a good point. I could have some color. I could have some colored variants of the gray. I have a high saturation and a low saturation version of my color palette so that I can have like a background foreground distinction, and maybe that's the kind of thing I can do. But I think my low saturation is even still like a little too saturated. Cubus, dude, you need to think about what you want to model in your ECS. Otherwise, you're going to mismodel and need to redo it for the stuff you actually want to model. You're back. No, I definitely know what I want to model. We're modeling, you know, crew members. We're modeling ships. But a ship isn't just a ship. A ship also has a block, a bunch of blocks that make up the ship. So having entities that can hold entities is super crucial. And in fact, for the blocks, we need to be very careful about how we array that so that we understand the position of the blocks implicitly. Just generate a 12 by 12 grid color. And each color is a grid of 8 by 8. Horizontal is changing value. Vertical is changing in saturation. Oh, interesting. That the benefit of it is that you can offset the color in shader. That is easy to change the color palette. That's a good idea. That's an interesting way, because that's kind of, I'm not gonna be able to pick my own colors, but I could definitely generate some colors. We're not really using it in doing a lot of, we're kind of painting our stuff, but that's still an interesting idea. The Falcam, thank you for the follow. I read you. Cubus, you'd concept out the entities themselves first before you finish the ECS. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. But the thing about if this ECS is done well is that it can accommodate all, you know, the huge variety of things that we might end up with. But yeah. You're not wrong. What I need to do is think more about entity relationships, about how to model those, because that's the backbone of this sort of thing. Because, like, you'd have something like, you know, you'll have, like, a ship. And a ship has a hull. And a hull has, like, ship has a hull, and hull plating is made up of, like, a bunch of block components. This is more than one component. I'm just putting it as a single card. And a ship also has, like, a crew, which again is more than one type of person. So there's crew. And then a crew has members, you know. So entities are made up of other components, but those other components are often themselves, you know, entities, depending on whether the component is indivisible in the case of a simple component, or if it's complex component. A complex component that also has, like, per instance data. Well, all components have per instance data, but a complex component is more often than not going to be its own entity. And so there's going to be a lot of sparse entity lookups, unfortunately, which maybe keeps a lot of the performance, you know, takes a lot of the performance off the table. But again, we're doing this partly just for the organizing principle of it, not just the performance games of indexing into things in contiguous memory. Yeah, the dream system that can do it all. And you need 20% and also 5% more that you didn't think about at first. But that's why we're doing the entity component system. Because if you concept that stuff out and you use just objects and you use, like, hard-coded objects, like, this is a ship, it does this is a crew, it does that, and it's all of its functionality and data is embedded in it, that becomes harder to manage over time, because that's your, like, let me refactor this, I want it to be able to do this versus this, I want to add this little thing. That becomes like a web of references, as it's been put to me, which can be very confusing as classes inherit and refer to other classes, like, ad nauseum. But if you have an entity component system, adding functionality is just adding a component and building a new system or tweaking an existing system. So if you base it on flexibility, if it's based around flexibility in its architecture, which an ECS system typically is, then at least it can be many things to many people. But yeah, these are important conversations to have. And you're still my workflow guru, because you're the one holding me accountable to this stuff. Because, yeah, it's easy to just say, oh, let me make this system that incorporates all the possible variants of objects that I'm going to need for my game. And yeah, that by itself means nothing. There's a lot more that needs to go on. Oh, it's after 10. When did that happen? All right, we're going to need to wrap it up here. But yeah, I have a lot of stuff to think about. I think we've made a little progress. I'm generally happy with the thing I thought up the other day, which is the memory pattern underlying the chunks, because that's really the thing that we needed, that kind of everything else kind of derives from, is how we were going to actually store and retrieve stuff from memory. And that's the stuff that's the thing that needs to be solidified. We can get more particular about, you know, what we're storing in memory, but how we're the model of the memory was really crucial, and I think I'm pretty happy with this. I think it's pretty reasonable. But yeah, we got a long way to go for sure. All right. Let's rate a teammate. I'm in the indie game devs team, stream team. And we've got someone working on some art who's also got a cozy dev space that they manage. And they seem to be working on some great stuff that's very dog oriented. And I'm very excited about that. So I think we're going to do that. I think we're going to go raid Otter Make Games. Hopefully that's another cool, chill place for people to hang out. Again, hopefully in a couple of weeks, these streams are going to be longer. They're going to go later. We're looking at like 4-hour streams. Thanks, Cubus. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for, you know, being the sounding board and being the, simultaneously the devil and the angel on my shoulder. I appreciate everyone hanging out. I appreciate all the viewers on YouTube. Thank you for the questions. Thanks, Mup Mup, the Falcam, Nubs a lot, Tejo, Scott McDonald. It's always great to see you. Everyone on Twitch that's come over too. Ferlansky, Cubis, Dudelius Catch, Brohart, Kaijiro, Yaria, Lucas, Flair the Bird. Thank you all. Thank you all for stopping by. Apologies if I missed anyone. I was kind of just scrolling up. We'll be back on Friday. We'll be back on Friday for another stream. Hopefully I'll have some more of this stuff figured out by then. I'll have some better answers. But yeah, thanks all for watching, and I'll see you next time. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye.